He made the worst decision of his life on that fateful basketball court. All he had to do was finish this one game, and a full scholarship and a spot at the country's top university would have been his. But right before the final whistle, his girlfriend dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. On one side stood a bright future within arm's reach. On the other, love and responsibility that came out of nowhere. Mike was lost, standing at the very first crossroads of his life with no idea which way to turn. After a moment of daze, he made a choice that stunned everyone in the gym. He walked away from his dream and his future and ran headfirst toward love. 20 years flew by, and Mike had turned into a middle-aged man with dull, lifeless eyes. Without a college degree, the promotion that should have been his went to an intern instead, simply because that kid had better credentials. Even his own teenage kids brushed off everything he said, keeping him at a cold, distant arm's length, facing one setback after another in both life and work. He blamed it all on that one wrong decision he made back then. If he hadn't chosen love that day, would his life have turned out completely different? So every time he faced his wife, all that pent-up resentment came pouring out whether he liked it or not. His wife finally decided to end their 20-year marriage because she was done with his endless complaining. With both his marriage and career in shambles, Mike went back to that basketball court where it all started. He used to be the golden boy of this court, with a future so bright it hurt to look at. But now he had become exactly the kind of man he used to despise. If he could do it all over again, he would have finished that game and run toward that brilliant future. Just as he was drowning in regret, a janitor appeared out of nowhere, almost as if he could see straight into Mike's soul. The old man said he'd bet Mike wished he could have a do-over, and Mike nodded in complete agreement. One stormy night, Mike saw the old man again, but as a truck roared past, the old man vanished into thin air. When he rushed to the bridge, there was no trace of the old man anywhere. And then, out of nowhere, a strange force yanked him into a swirling vortex. He didn't drag himself to his buddy Ned's place until the next morning, soaking wet from head to toe. And when he went to wash off the grime, the face staring back at him in the mirror was young, so young it nearly scared him out of his skin. Just like that one bizarre twist of fate turned middle-aged Mike back into a 17-year-old. He went straight back to school to ask about the old man, but they told him there was only a female janitor on staff. Right when he was at his wit's end, he noticed the wet footprints at his feet. He followed the trail of moisture and somehow found himself outside a basketball court, watching kids his age goofing off and playing ball, and a bold idea started brewing in his mind. He was going back to school. With Ned's help, Mike got enrolled, and as luck would have it, he ended up in the same class as his own kids. He stepped back onto that familiar court and realized his skills and athleticism hadn't aged a day in 20 years. Just as he was riding high on that feeling of getting something precious back, an old, familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was the coach, the one who'd been devastated when Mike walked away all those years ago. Mike was stunned. He never imagined he'd run into his old coach again like this, after all this time. And the coach was so impressed by Mike's skills that he offered him a spot on the team. Right when Mike thought his dream was finally within reach, life sucker punched him again. In the bathroom, which reeked of disinfectant, Mike found his son Alex tied up in a stall like some kind of prisoner. He was horrified. As a father, he had no idea his own son was going through this at school. After Mike freed him, Alex let his guard down for the first time around this stranger who just saved him. Turns out, because he was too gentle and kind, the school bullies had been picking on him nonstop, and he'd never even had the guts to tell the girl he'd liked for years how he felt. Before Mike could even process what Alex was going through, he found out that his precious daughter was dating the very bully who'd been torturing her brother. Mike felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Rage burned in his eyes, and that sharp glare caught the bully's attention right away. The kid strutted over and slammed a basketball right into Alex's head. Faced with the provocation, Mike didn't throw a punch. Instead, he calmly said he'd be taking this up with the bully's father. The bully laughed out loud and hurled the ball straight at Mike's face. But Mike caught it like it was nothing. Then he spun the ball lazily on his fingertip and launched a quiet, calculated counterattack. Mike's words left the bully with nothing to say, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of satisfaction. He'd always believed that one wrong decision back then had ruined his life. But now, for the first time, he realized his own selfishness might be destroying his kids' lives too. All these years, he'd never really been a father to them. From then on, Mike became Alex's best friend, playing ball with him and standing up to bullies side by side. Mike was surprised to discover that this quiet kid had the same natural talent for basketball that he once had. If he could get Alex on the school team, maybe it would rebuild his confidence and turn his whole situation around. Just then, his wife Scarlett pulled up in her car. Seeing the woman he'd spent half his life with, now looking at him like he was just some random kid, hit Mike like a ton of bricks. Scarlett was equally thrown off when she saw his face. This teenager looked exactly like her husband did back in the day, and without thinking, she reached out and squeezed his cheeks. From that day on, Mike kept showing up at Scarlett's house, always pretending to be an outsider. Besides coaching Alex on his game, he'd also help her out in the backyard. When she started talking about all her ideas and plans for the garden, Mike was mesmerized for the first time. He realized she'd once had dreams of her own, and she'd given up so many of them for the sake of their family. One day, she led him to the backyard. Her renovation was a total success, with all kinds of flowers and plants arranged beautifully, bursting with life. Mike couldn't believe it. That same yard that had been neglected and barren for years because of his self-pity, laziness, and constant complaining, now looked completely transformed under Scarlett's hands. Looking at this dreamy little paradise, full of warmth and care, something deep inside Mike stirred. All these years, he'd completely overlooked his wife's light and her gifts. When he looked at her again, the selfishness and resentment were gone from his eyes, replaced by something fragile and aching, a desperate kind of longing. And in that moment, it hit him. Maybe his failures in life were never because he'd chosen the wrong path. Maybe it was because he'd never walked his own path the way he should have. When he saw Scarlett practicing her dance steps for a date that night, he offered to be her practice partner. He reached for a CD and popped it into the player with the ease of long familiarity. The moment that melody started playing, Scarlett froze. It was the exact same song she and her husband had picked for their wedding. She felt a little shaken and instinctively kept her distance from Mike, but he kept stepping closer. A subtle, unspoken tension started to build between them. Looking into those deep eyes that didn't seem to belong to a teenager at all, Scarlett felt her heart race. There was something strangely familiar about this boy. But Alex walked in right then and shattered the moment. Snapping back to reality, Scarlett felt a rush of panic and hurried away, leaving Mike standing there awkwardly. Scarlett's date showed up to take her to the dance. Mike wanted to stop them, but Scarlett just handed him the divorce papers and asked him to have Ned pass them along to her husband. He thought he could go back and fix the past, but he'd forgotten that life had already moved on without him. Watching the two of them walk away, Mike felt like a knife had carved a hole straight through his heart. But just then, he caught a glimpse of his daughter sneaking into the school bully's car under cover of night. His heart jumped into his throat, and on pure fatherly instinct, he followed them with Alex in tow, all the way to some hormone-fueled party. The moment they walked in, a few young girls blocked their way. Looking at how little self-respect they had, Mike didn't flinch. Instead, he spoke to them like the grown-up he really was. "If you don't respect yourself," he said, "how can you expect anyone else to?" Seeing that they weren't listening, he turned away and scanned the crowd until he spotted his daughter Mary, the girl he'd raised with such care, now lost in some bully's arms. He told her to leave that guy, but Mary was so caught up in her infatuation that she wouldn't listen to anyone. What broke Mike even more was that she was planning to throw away her chance at a top-tier college just to follow this loser to some dead-end school. He wasn't about to let his daughter make the same mistake he did. One day, on his way back to class, Mike saw his daughter sitting alone by the field, crying. When he asked what was wrong, she told him she'd turned down the bully's pushy advances, and he'd dumped her for it. She was heartbroken. It was her first real crush, and her first time being rejected. He comforted her gently. "When you're young, every little thing feels like the end of the world. But it's not. Life is just getting started. You might run into a few more jerks along the way, but one day, you'll meet the one who's really meant for you." His words were like a warm ray of sunshine cutting through the gloom in Mary's heart. She looked at this boy in front of her and felt something she'd never felt before, a warmth she couldn't quite explain, and before she knew it, she was leaning in closer. Seeing her get too close, Mike pulled away in a hurry. That same party gave Alex a rare chance to spend some time alone with the girl he'd been pining over. Watching the two of them hit it off, both Mike and Scarlett couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. For the first time, Scarlett thanked this young man from the bottom of her heart. She saw how he'd protected and helped her kids, and she saw the sense of responsibility hiding beneath that young face. Maybe it was the moonlight, or maybe it was just that the love had never really faded. But Mike couldn't stop himself from kissing Scarlett. Everyone was stunned. He laid it all out, that he'd traveled back in time to his 17-year-old self. But Scarlett didn't believe a word of it. She just took him for some cocky kid, trying to act wise beyond his years. After that day, Mike fell into a deep gloom. He used to think his wife was the obstacle standing between him and his dreams. But now he realized it was actually that obsession with the dream he'd lost that had been holding him back, and he'd figured it out way too late. That day was their divorce hearing. To win Scarlett back, Mike and Ned barged into the courthouse and insisted that he had a letter from Scarlett's husband that needed to be read out loud in person. So the judge let him stay. But when he picked up the paper, His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't calm down. He still remembered the day he first saw Scarlett, the earthy smell of rain hanging in the air, and the way he'd fallen for her at first sight. He read aloud, "Without you, I would die. And the moment you said you loved me, I felt like all the bad luck in the world was gone. Because I had you. Then I grew up, and I lost my way. I blamed you for all my failures. I know you think we're past fixing. I don't want you to think that. But if I really love you, I should set you free. Maybe that's just how people are. We throw away what we have and only realize we should have held on when it's too late. Maybe letting her go was the best thing he could do for her." In the end, Mike turned and walked away, grief and longing written all over his face, and that look made Scarlett's heart skip a beat too. Maybe she still had feelings for him, or maybe fate was pulling the strings, but she paused the hearing and picked up the letter Mike had left behind. But when she opened it, all she saw was the court's address, nothing else. So where did all those stories come from? Those memories that only the two of them could have known. Baffled, she flipped through her high school photo album, and when she saw Mike's young face staring back at her, something stirred in her heart again. Meanwhile, Mike turned all his regrets into fuel to keep moving forward. Since things were already what they were, he decided to give his life one more real shot. Luckily, the coach came to him again soon after, just like 20 years ago. He had another chance to get recruited and go to college. But with his dream right there in front of him, he didn't feel nearly as happy as he'd expected. Game day came around and Scarlett showed up with their daughter. When Mike's eyes accidentally landed on his wife in the stands, he unconsciously made that special gesture he'd done for Scarlett so many times before. Scarlett froze because that was their private little love signal, something only the two of them shared. The game was intense, but every time Mike looked over at Scarlett by the sidelines, time seemed to stand still. Mike was standing at that same fateful crossroads again, the scouts watching from the stands, the coach yelling at him from the court, and the one person he could never let go of, right there at the edge of it all. And in that moment, Mike finally understood, no matter how many times he came back, no matter how fate kept spinning in circles, his answer would never change. He put down the ball again and ran straight to Scarlett. Turns out his choice back then wasn't a compromise, and what he already had was the best life he could have ever asked for. In that hallway, the crack in time opened up again, and Mike went back to being 40 years old, but this time he had no regrets. He told Scarlett, with all the love in his heart, that she was the best decision he ever made. He'd just forgotten that along the way, but he would never forget it again. He knew he'd been selfish and immature for the past 20 years, but if she would have him, he swore he'd spend the rest of his life making it up to her. Maybe the greatest regret in life isn't the choices we make, but forgetting, somewhere along the long road, why we made them in the first place. Just like Mike in this story, he took 20 years to walk one giant circle, only to realize that what he'd been looking for was never about rewriting the past. It was about remembering what was in his heart all along. Because the person who makes you willingly stop in your tracks, that person is already the most worthwhile journey of your life.